So, Terry, what'd you have for breakfast this morning?
I just had a cup of coffee this morning, black coffee, medium roast.
With some food, too, right?
No,
Or
no food, just Black Rifle coffee. That's all I had this morning.
No food.
No food.
Brave.
I love coffee.
Is that an every morning routine?
I usually have a couple cups of coffee in the morning, 2 or 3.
Yeah. Well, Jeff would call you an addict. We've discussed that on a previous episode.
We don't want to go
Really?
too far down that road.
That's not today's episode.
No. In fact, today we're going to be talking about something totally separate. We're going to be talking about the idea of singleness. Am I incomplete if I'm single? And we got Terry here with us. But we're going to be talking about that today on Deepish Thoughts. Well, welcome to Deepish Thoughts. My name is Jeff.
And I'm Jamie. And Terry Sellers, also known around here as T Money, is with us today. Terry, thanks.
Absolutely.
for joining us.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So just start by letting people know a little bit about who you are, Terry.
Well, I'm now the outreach pastor here at Longmont Calvary. I've been attending here. I went to school or to church here in junior high till about 82 or so, and then I left. I came back about 10, 12 years ago and got really involved in the church, and now I'm on staff here.
And Terry's a guy that Jeff and I both really love and admire, and so we asked him to join us today. And thanks for bringing your insights into this.
Absolutely,
today, Terry.
yeah. I'm excited to do this. I'm glad to be here.
So we are talking about this idea of being single. By single we mean not dating, not engaged, not married, and just what that means and how to think about that. Of course, all of us at this table have experience with being single. Jeff, you're now married. I've been married for a while. Terry, you're single.
Yes.
And when we see the way you carry yourself and live your life, we just admire your contentment and the way you approach your life. And so that's why we wanted your insights on this episode in particular. But let's just start with the question is, am I incomplete if I'm single? And I think that's something maybe people think sometimes. What is it that feels incomplete about being single? Let's start with you, Terry.
I felt a lot of that in my younger life, actually. I'm 60 now. But, growing up and then getting into the age where people get married, guys I went to college with and stuff, getting married, having kids, starting families and all that stuff, and I didn't have that. I did feel insignificant, even though my friendships with them didn't change, and I was included in that too, and I still felt really included when I was doing things with those families. There'd be gatherings, we'd get together, and everybody have their wife, and everybody have their kid, and then there I was by myself. So yeah, it felt a little insignificant. I felt insignificant because I didn't have that, and a little jealous, honestly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's I think that's a really common feeling, is that jealousy or feeling just like, I don't know, I think relationships are inherently comparative, or like, I don't know, I feel like we draw so much identity from relationships. Like, even like when it comes to relationships that aren't even romantic, right? Like, I know that person, and so by association, maybe I'm cool, or, right, maybe I'm more complete, or I've got it all together. And I think a lot of times we do that, where we think that somehow the people that we know or the people we associate with, that makes who we are. Like, somehow validates that we're valuable in some way. You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
if I'm, because I think what I see with like students a lot is like, if I'm not dating or if I'm not in a relationship, well, maybe that means I'm not dateable, and that because I got something wrong with me, right? Or like there's some sort of characteristic that I have that's unattractive.
Yeah.
We draw a lot of identity from it.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah, like I'm flawed or I'm lesser.
Yeah.
Because I'm not attached to someone.
I'm only 3/4 of a person or something like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's super cultural to feel like that.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
It's very true. But what about you, Jamie? What do you think? Where do you think that comes from?
Yeah, I relate to that. When it's weird because even in high school, where dating's not always a great idea in high school, but I didn't date in high school, and I did feel inferior to people who had somebody, and less desirable.
Yeah.
And so I can relate to those feelings. And it seems like we can feel that way ourselves, but it also seems like that's almost put on other people sometimes too, right? People are viewed, would you say that, Terry, that in society, and we all work at church, so let's talk about church world. Sometimes in church, it's almost like people who are single whether that's they haven't been married or they're maybe widowed or divorced. Those people can be overlooked sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you've experienced that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So why do you think that is?
I think it's because, especially in a church setting, singles or whatever, it's usually the youth, right? The kids in high school or the people that just start college, right? They're still single or whatever. So they have single stuff, and it's for the younger people. But there's just a big need for that kind of stuff for, people my age and a little bit younger too. But it's just, I don't think it's something that's ever looked into or hasn't been looked into. I think the trend's starting to turn a little bit to where, hey, we need to get people that are older and single in the church together to do stuff. But I think it's just been a thing that's overlooked because so many people in the church are married.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And you're one that's helping turn that tide here at this particular church.
Yes,
'cause
absolutely.
You understand that. Yeah. Jeff, what do you think? Why do we tend to overlook the single people sometimes?
Yeah, I think that because we project, I think it's, going back to what I was saying about insecurities that we feel maybe within ourselves if we're not attached to someone. I think sometimes people, I don't think that comes from nowhere, right? Like, I think that people, maybe they feel that insecurity of themselves and then they maybe project that insecurity on other people too. And so maybe there's this kind of like assumption that maybe there's something going on. But I don't think that's accurate at all. Like to see people, like somebody who's single and be like, oh, maybe they're not trustworthy. I think that's ridiculous. But I think that for some reason there's just like, I think it's mainly because people don't know what to do with it. Like people don't understand. And so like, I think because we live in a culture of you find somebody to, marry and that like that, being in a relationship is so key. Then when somebody doesn't live that out, for one, I think people are just confused. Like people are like, I don't know what to do with that. And then because they don't know what to do with that, they don't know how to engage it either. I think it just happens that way. And so the natural thing is I'm just going to avoid that situation. I think. I'm just musing, I'm not sure what the reason is. But I think you're right, Terry, when you said that, like singles ministries and stuff like that are really typically the target audience is young people. Right. And I think
Absolutely.
You're right. But it makes it tough when in churches the culture is a lot of people are married. And so what do we do? When there are single older people,
right?
What do you do with that?
Right. And I, luckily for me, as you guys know, you know me very well, I'm very outgoing. So I can be in situations and it doesn't bother me as much because I'm with whoever I'm with and I'm having an okay time.
Yeah.
But there's also people that are single that are probably introverts and quiet. And if they don't have somebody reach out to them, they're probably having a hard time even trying to go to any like church function or anything because they're going to feel like they stand out or something like that. You know what I mean?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because, everybody listening maybe knows somebody in that situation, and
Right.
maybe that's someone we could reach out to. Or
Right.
Yeah. So I'm glad you said that. I was just thinking too of how, marriage itself gets a little bit of a bad rap in our current culture, and so the church, and probably rightly so, wants to emphasize marriage in a healthy way. And maybe we just go too far in that direction, and we trying to do something well, we actually do it at the expense of other things we need to emphasize also.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a classic situation of thinking about the majority of people and not like, and just being like, yeah, we'll make, whatever it is that we design, we're going to set it up for, the 90% of people. But then the 10%, like what happens in that situation? What happens to them? And I think that happens where we're just kind of like, well, we're not going to spend our energy there because there's maybe less people in that camp or whatever it is.
Right.
I think it can be an efficiency thing gone wrong, because I think you're right. Sometimes we do something well, like maybe it's like marriage ministries or or like couples ministries, and I think I think you're right, at the expense of others that are just kind of forgotten.
Yeah. Something to think about.
Yeah, which is really too bad. But
Yeah. So another thing that I've been thinking about as we've gotten ready for this episode is just I'd love to hear from you, Terry, how because some people probably have seen you, valued you, included you, and some people maybe not. So tell us, those who are listening who are not single, what are ways that they can see and they can value single folks in their life? And maybe what are things they should not do when they interact with you?
I mean, one of the biggest thing is just, just because I'm single doesn't make me any different than anybody else. I just don't happen to have a spouse, right? So, I mean, you don't have to try to beat around the bush about that or anything. It's just interact with me like you'd interact with anybody else. It's fine. Yeah, I don't have a wife, and that's okay. But I would just want them to just be normal with me.
Yeah.
I guess for lack of a better term, it's like I don't want them to be treated any differently because I'm single, right? Just interact with me like you'd interact with anybody else.
Yeah.
I think that's really important because I don't know. I think sometimes when obviously there's going to be things in churches and things come up where couples get together for stuff, right, or whatever, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But there's also going to be things that in the church where everybody's invited, and they shouldn't treat people who are single any different. They should just talk to them normally like they would anybody else.
One thing I've seen, maybe this is not just church people, but I've certainly seen church people do this. If somebody's single and like not still in college or 20s or whatever, they feel this need to set them up with somebody.
Yeah.
You've experienced
yeah.
this,
Oh,
Terry?
man, yeah.
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 So I mean, how does it? People are probably well-meaning, but
They
tell
are.
us
They
how
are.
it feels when
Well,
someone's trying to do that.
First of all, it's okay because I understand they're just trying to help me, right? I mean, there was a time back when I was younger that used to bother me because I'm like, I was a little angrier back then, and I didn't understand why I was single or whatever. But now it's just like that's okay, who knows? Maybe sometimes somebody will set me up with somebody and it will work.
Yeah,
it hasn't happened in a long time, but sometimes people that aren't single try to fix people that are single. We don't need fixing.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not broken, right? I mean, obviously, I'm not the only single guy on the face of the earth.
Right.
Right.
It just seems like sometimes people want to try to, and that's okay. They're just trying to help. I understand that. Other people might not take that as well. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you just have to kind of tread carefully with that kind of stuff. I've had people say, well, why aren't you married? You're 60, or you need to be married, or how come nobody's caught you yet? And I'm just like, you know what? God's got a plan for everybody, right? The way I look at it, this is the way God's had my life mapped out, and so I'm not married yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't always used to think that way, but I do now.
Yeah, well, it seems like there's a lot of things that people say indirectly, maybe because they don't know how to respond to something that can like indirectly be kind of like, I don't know, is shaming the right word? Like what you're saying, like that sounds like people are just kind of being in it, like maybe totally accidentally like hurting your feelings or being
Absolutely.
unkind.
Yeah.
So maybe people just aren't very thoughtful around this
Right.
Yeah.
topic.
Which is why it's important for us to be talking about it right now, right? Just to
Absolutely.
help
Right,
people
yeah.
be aware. Because if someone's trying to set you up, maybe they're just well-meaning and think, yeah, this person I think would work well with Terry, or maybe they're thinking or coming across as, like you said, yeah, you need to be fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's just not the right mindset.
Not at all.
Yeah, because that's how people feel about themselves too. Going back to that a bit ago, it's like I think for me, for a lot of my life, I felt like, if I wasn't in a relationship, like there was something wrong with me. And so I think like, in a way, it's like once I had like a spouse, then it's like, oh, my life is going to be better, and it's going to be like my life is going to be complete. And I think people carry that projection even like into their marriage. They still feel like that. Oh, if I lost my spouse for some reason, I would be like an empty shell of a person, or I wouldn't have a
Right.
life anymore.
Right.
And then they project that on other people who are single. Oh, well, they don't have a spouse, therefore they need this, and somehow this is like, I think people also mistake like being married as like that's God's will for people and that's it. Like,
Yeah.
oh, if you're not married, somehow God's plan only involves getting married and not singleness, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Like that's so crazy. Like where do we get that idea?
Yeah, I don't know.
But we do have that idea, don't we?
I think so.
I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, I mean, because obviously, God said, a man's not supposed to be alone, right? But that's not that doesn't mean everybody's going to be married or going to be in a relationship. That's just not how it works, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I do actually have a scripture that I was thinking about this the other day, and it's 1 Corinthians 7:32. It said, "But I want you to be free from concern. One who is unmarried is concerned about the things of the Lord, but the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided."
Yeah.
Right? So, why it's great to be married, and there's a lot of good things about that, right? I mean, you start families, you have your kids and stuff like that. Sometimes for me, being single, it's like, I don't have to worry about focusing on that. I can focus more on God, which has kind of actually gotten me to this point. I have to be honest with you guys. With my mom, God rest her soul, she died 11 years ago, but I talked to her once about this when I was younger and feeling really insignificant because I wasn't married. And my mom was a Christian. She said, "You're not ready to be married." And I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" She said, "Look at your life. Look how you live your life. You just focus on you and your friends. You don't talk to God." And this is when I had gotten away from the church. You don't focus on God. You don't give God any time. She said, "I think God's saving you from a bad marriage by not having anybody in your life." And of course, at the time, I thought that was just crazy. But now looking back at it and having come back to Christ like I did 12 years ago or so, and getting involved in the church and going to school and graduating and being on staff here, I think she was 100% right. I
Wow.
think she was 100% right.
So it's something that God is, like you said, He's mapped out your story, and this is something that He's
Yep.
wanted to use
Absolutely.
in your life. I mean, we've talked about some of the difficulties or challenges, but as you started to talk about there, Terry, there are advantages to a single lifestyle too. You want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously from a superficial standpoint, you can come and go as you please. You don't have to worry about this. You don't, who's picking up the kids or who's doing this or whatever. But
Right.
for me, and not to say that I don't hope someday to meet somebody and get married. I would love nothing more than that, right? Maybe God will put somebody in my path. But this opened up a lot for me going back to school at an older age at 57 and graduating and coming on staff and just strengthening my relationship with Christ, which my mom talked about. You don't ever give any time to God, right? Back in the day. My walk with Christ and my relationship is so much stronger with Him now than it was even 15 years ago. And I think this is why, as He was trying to guide me to how He could use me to further His word as a single person, right? And maybe to talk to some people, and it hasn't come up yet, but it's been on my mind about, I'm not the only person my age that's single. How do we talk to each other about that's okay? There's some ladies at the church that have been getting some singles events together. They played Bible trivia a couple weeks ago and stuff like that. Really important that they're finally doing that. But I'd like to talk to them just about sometimes when they're feeling lonely and things like that, that it's okay. So for me, that's a positive thing, that I can take what I've learned to share with others.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also like, I think, yeah, that's really good what you're saying is like using it to help other people. And I think people forget that, I think in the pursuit of other, like maybe in the pursuit of relationships, people forget that like how much impact somebody who's like, if you're single, you don't have, like you said, you don't have to think about like picking up kids and stuff just all those things that come with that.
Right.
And there is something really valuable about that too. I mean, I've seen some single people be like the most like rock star Christians, if I could use that language, of like people who are just like on fire, trying to like follow God and invest in other people. And I feel like people just can go all in when you don't have, I don't want to say like something in the way, because that makes it sound like marriage is like bad or getting in the way of our life. But I think you know what I mean when I say
do.
like that's just something else that we have in our mind. And so when that's not present, I feel like there's such a opportunity to be present in other people's lives and invest in kind of like a all-in way. It's just different.
Right. And, I think a good point, too, for that is so people who are married or who are dating, maybe God's working His plan differently with them. It's like maybe they're on the verge of not having a relationship with Christ or whatever, but they brought their spouse in or their girlfriend or whoever who is a Christian to help them build that relationship. So it was done in a different way with them. You know what I mean? For me, it was just I needed my time alone to figure it out, and I finally, he finally got a hold of me. But it might be the point where, well, I don't know how my life's going, but then this godly woman comes into their life, and they see what they're messing with their relationship with Christ. So God worked that way with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so He just uses different things for different people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Our stories are so unique.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's a question for you, Jamie. And this is kind of twisting the question, but I'm curious. And we didn't prep this question, but I'll ask you anyway.
Uh-oh.
But like, do you ever feel like I know you're happily married and you love your family and your kids and stuff like that. Do you ever feel like there's some things that you're just like, I love my family, but it would be so cool to be involved in blank. But I have a busy life already.
Well, I was thinking about 1 Corinthians 7 also, Terry, because it speaks a lot to this. And one of the things he says in there that you kind of got at already, Terry, is that it is easy for your interests to be divided, right? You can have a divided interest where, you were kind of hesitant to say a marriage can get in the way.
Yeah,
of us
it just
serving
sounds
God,
bad,
and
right?
it does. And yet that's kind of what 1 Corinthians 7 is saying, is like your marriage can get in the way of walking with God. So I think, I am super happily married. And I think the way I think about it is I need to make sure that my interests are not divided, but that as a husband and dad and whatever other hats I wear in life, that all of it is ultimately walking with the Lord, right?
Sure, yeah.
Yep.
And so, just making sure our interests are not divided, I think, is kind of how I think about it. And that we got to think about that wherever we're at, right? If we're single, if we're dating somebody, about to get married, divorced, widowed, whatever the season of life is, it's like, okay, I got to be devoted to the Lord in this season, whatever that looks like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because we can be distracted. If we're single, we can be distracted by all sorts of things too. It's not like 1 Corinthians 7 is saying the only way your attention will be divided in this world is if you're married, right? It's
Right,
like,
that's right.
Right.
no, it's just saying one of the many things that can divide your attention is this,
Yeah.
and even though it's a good thing. But yeah, our attention can still be divided even if we're not
Absolutely.
married.
Yeah.
right?
And
We can
another
be
thing he's
distracted.
saying there is that, this world's going to end soon and we're going to be in eternity, and we need to be thinking about that. And it's easy to be, as a married person or as a single person, it's easy to be all just kind of obsessed with this life and what's going on here. And, this life is important, but it's short and we have eternity after
Absolutely.
this. And that's what we
Yeah.
need to be thinking about. So that's another kind of factor in that 1 Corinthians 7 passage. But were there other scriptures or things said in the Bible that came to your guys' minds?
I did think of another one when I was thinking about this, Hebrews 13:5, which says, "Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, I will never leave you, never will I forsake you." If you don't think about that term the right way or take it out of context, that verse, they might just think he's just talking about money. Well, he's not just talking about worldly things. He's just be content with what you have. I'm very content with what I have. I'm content right now with being single and loving my life, going to school and working here at the church and being a pastor and seeing how I can help others. Super content with that, right?
Yeah.
There was a time I wasn't. I was more worried about worldly things, but that verse popped up to me. I'm like, that's a good thing for singles to think about too, is like, don't go out looking, oh man, I need to find a wife or a husband, or why am I not whole, or anything like this. Just be content with what you had, and God will give you what you need.
That's
Yeah.
really good.
But it's so hard to trust that.
It is.
Whatever your life looks like, it's just hard to trust that like God's going to take care of what we need,
Right.
And He's going to provide what we need in life, and because we want so many things, we're like, oh, this will make me happy, and so often we're like totally misguided.
Right.
The thing we want is gonna. That's why I think it's so insightful what your mom said to you. Like, man, I think I would have been upset. If my mom said that, I'd be like, what do you know? I'm not listening to you
Right.
anymore. But it shows the wisdom, of somebody who's older than us, who's been following God for a long time, right? Like,
Right.
there's wisdom there, and she knew.
Absolutely.
She knew something that, in your younger years you didn't recognize, and now you do.
Absolutely.
And that's just really cool.
Yeah.
It's a testament to your mom.
Yeah, I
and the
think
wisdom
so.
that she
I
had.
think about that a lot, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And I think
Yeah.
we see that contentment in your life, Terry. You
Definitely.
don't come across as bitter, resentful, as an incomplete person at
Right.
all. I just don't think of you that way, because you have found that contentment. I wanted to ask you something else too, because maybe some people would think contentment means I just don't even have any desire to be married ever. If I'm going to be content, that means I can't even want that. I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, what would you say to that?
Yeah, no, I don't think that's true at all. I mean, I'm content for right now. Would I love to meet somebody and get married at some point? Absolutely. And I'm not going to be the first guy at my age to finally get married, right? It happens.
Yeah.
Right? I just haven't met the right person yet. But no, I mean, and I would be, if he put somebody in my path and we wound up getting married, then I'd be very content with that too, and probably happy.
Yeah.
Not that I'm not happy now, but I could share my life with somebody else and share my love of Christ with somebody else, which, at the end of the day, that's what I want to be able to do. Not only share my life, but show them how God works in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
So, because I think you're right, Jamie. You're onto something that, like, a lot of times contentment, it's like, oh, I don't desire blank anymore, and that's contentment. But what you guys are saying is contentment is so much more of maybe it's holding attention, right? Holding tension of, like, I want this, but I'm going to choose to be like, no, I'm satisfied, and, like, I don't need this. And so it's
Right.
more of a mindset of, like, being okay with having a desire and that desire not being fulfilled. Is that a fair way to say it? Because I want to make sure we communicate clearly. What does contentment actually mean? Because I think it's really unclear.
No, that was a good summary. It's possible. Like, this is really important for a lot of unfulfilled longings that we have, right? Like, we have them, and it's okay to have them, and yet we can still have, in some way, contentment and joy in our life, even if we have that unfulfilled longing.
Right.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, we've already talked about some stuff that the Bible says about singleness. I'm trying to think if there's any other stuff that we need to mention. Jamie, anything that comes to mind for you of other Bible references or things in Scripture that we see about singleness?
Just, I think it's important to remember that Jesus, well, number one, was single. He didn't get married. When God came to this earth as a human being, he was a single person. Interesting. And a lot of his followers have been single. We talked about 1 Corinthians 7 written by the Apostle Paul and him finding that contentment as a single person and even saying, I wish all of you could be content like I am, But he said specifically that God gives different people different gifts and opportunities. But Scripture celebrates singleness. And Jesus, not only was he single, but he celebrated singleness, said that that's just something God gave to certain people. And so that's important.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm annoyed because that's what I was thinking about too. So you got my...
Well, you
stole
asked.
your thunder.
You
Yeah,
let
I
me
know.
go
I
first.
shouldn't have asked.
Yeah.
I should just offered it up instead of
Yeah,
asking
you should have, right?
Dang it.
Yeah, you want Cameron to edit
Yeah,
this and
that'd
then
be
you can
great.
get the credit.
Yeah,
you
that'd
can
be
say
great.
it first.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we'll see what happens.
I gave him that idea in case anybody's wondering. Before this, I was telling him that he should talk about that. No, you know. No, that's really good though. What else do we need to talk about with singleness? I feel like there's more we can uncover here.
Anything else on your mind, Terry, that we haven't gotten to?
No. Like I said, I think I guess for the people that are listening that are single out there, and actually for the ones that aren't, just try to be wary of those relationships when you're talking to somebody, especially the ones that are maybe are married or dating or whatever. Like I said before, just don't treat people that are single like any differently than you would treat anybody else, and invite them along. Even if there's something you're going along, hey, we're doing this, and it might just be couples. Invite them along. Who's to say we won't want to come along, right? To some kind of a lunch or whatever it might be. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable for single people to be there and not have a spouse. I was in Atlanta a couple weeks ago doing a wedding for a friend of mine, and of course, the house we stayed at and everything, everybody was married, right? And so there was a couple times that weekend I'm like, I wasn't not content. I was just thinking about, wow, I wonder how my life would have looked if had I had a wife or whatever by now. But it was fleeting, But I think the important thing is just we want to be included in stuff too. But we're trying to do that too with trying to get the singles group going here a little bit and making sure that there are activities, especially with summer coming up. Hey, the singles group can go hiking together or go paddle boarding or do stuff like that. I think it's important that people realize that stuff needs to happen too, and not just the youth like we talked about before, the college age kids or whatever.
Right.
I think that stuff's never really been thought about in the church because, again, people are married, right? And then there's the few that aren't. But I think the way times have changed, we need to remember to try to focus on that stuff too.
Yeah. And that's why I'm so glad you're bringing it up.
Yeah.
It's just to help with the awareness for people.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's really important.
And some people are wired differently. Like I said, me, I get along with everybody. So if I can go with a group and it's married people, whatever, it usually doesn't bother me too much. But there's going to be some people out there that need to be reached that aren't comfortable in that situation.
Sure.
But then if maybe I get invited or somebody else does, it's okay if the other people are married. We can still we can still communicate and fellowship and be together, right? I mean, we're all God's children, so there's no reason we can't be together and share the love of Christ together, whether we're married or not, or dating or not.
Yeah. What would you say is like one of your biggest, like, you know, because we've talked a lot about contentment. Obviously, that's really important. That's really key for a conversation like this, and something I think we all need to develop, whether we're married or single or whatever. I think that's just important. But what other tips, like what would you give as like a big like tip for somebody who's single and struggles? Because I think some people who are single feel lonely. And that's just so hard. Like it's a terrible way to feel. So like what would you give as like a tip for what to do if you find yourself in that situation?
Reach out to somebody, whether they're a married somebody or not. Reach out to and let them know how you're feeling. Reach out to your pastor, or if you're not involved, like at a church, reach out to your friends, and just try to surround yourself with some people who might be able to lift you up a little bit. Having been in that situation, and luckily for me, I've always had friends surround me, right? I've always had friends very supportive of me, even if I was feeling that way. But unfortunately, it can lead to some bad things too if you're not careful with that, with going down the wrong paths with alcohol or drugs or stuff like that if you're not careful. So don't try to take it on yourself, because you can't. Even being single, obviously you have to have family and stuff like that out there. Maybe it's a fractured family, I don't know. But you can't try to do this yourself. You need to reach out to people, and you need to reach out to God and have a conversation with God and ask him, hey, how can I get through how I'm feeling right now? Is there something you're trying to tell me? Is there something you're trying to lead me to? And go to God, because he'll be there for you.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, what do you guys think? Final takeaways from our conversation today. What would you say are just kind of like major points, things we need to just keep in mind as people go from this episode?
I think my awareness has just grown hearing your thoughts, Terry. So I'm grateful for that, and I'm hoping that awareness is growing in everybody listening.
Yeah, me too. Just to get people to recognize that we're all different. We're all different. We're all different human beings, but aside from skin color or where we come from or background, married, unmarried, we're all different, but we're all God's children. And so, church, sometimes you look, I mean, I don't even think about the church like I did when I was a kid. Everybody wore a suit and tie, and you came on Sunday, and, but it was the same thing as like, this family comes to church, and here's their kids, and now their kids come to church with their kids. It's not like that. There's not a stamp of life that God has that everybody's the same. And so I think, for me, my takeaway and my advice would be, whether it's at our church or another church or whatever circles you run in, try to find a way for singles to be able to congregate together and do things together, and share God's love. I mean, I know God loves me. I have a great relationship with Christ. I want to be around other singles to tell them it's okay if they're feeling lonely or they don't have things going the right way or not feeling like it's going the right way. Let's stick it together and we live 10 minutes from the mountains. Let's go do a hike together up in the beautiful country.
Yeah.
Right? Be there for each other. I mean, God wants us to be there for each other.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's really good. One I think final takeaway I'm thinking of is just like communicating where we're at. And just communicating with people in general. Terry, you were saying that communicating with people, if you like, maybe you're feeling lonely or whatever, like communicating that with people around you who care about you.
Absolutely.
I think that's really meaningful. But also from like on the side of people who maybe you're in a relationship or you're married, like reaching out to people who are single and like making sure that you're also communicating with them and like being, trying to build those relationships. Yeah. And kind of making sure we're connected, because like you said, when we're connected, that's really meaningful, and we can do life together, even whether we're in different stages or phases or circumstances of life. Like we can still be connected and together in that way, which is cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, this has been a really valuable conversation, and Terry, really grateful for your
thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And your insights.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to this, and I'm glad you guys had this on your things of list to do for your podcast this year, because I think it's extremely important.
Yeah,
I really do.
Yeah. Good. Well, take to heart what you've heard today, everyone, and don't forget to follow us on social media, and we'll see you next time on Deepish Thoughts.